It was obviously homicide, and from the outset it seemed obvious who did it. Obvious to experts, forensic scientists, police, the courts.
The taxi driver's talking about how he came up into the house.
But to some idealistic amateurs, there was another element. The human factor.
I did not kill my husband. I loved my husband, and I still love him.
I think she is guilty as sin.
Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. For veterans of police work, it was a sadly routine challenge in a working day. Someone unaccustomed to violence made a mess of murder, left many self-incriminating clues. It was a simple crime to solve, just like a tidy TV episode. But this would turn into a real-life drama that has run for 16 years, raising timeless questions about guilt and innocence.
Date is the 20th of July, 1995. The victim was found lying out here by ambulance. Apparently the bike was on top of him.
The victim was found battered to death in his driveway.
We have blood on a pillow, and the carpet is very soaked. Possibly somebody trying to clean up.
Inside the house, police quickly discovered more evidence of a brutal attack.
You can see there's quite a bit of blood splattering, and it goes right up towards the ceiling.
And there was someone who had been in the house during what was obviously a violent struggle. Starting here, somehow ending up outside, a potential witness.
The wife was still in the house, so I said, well, bring the wife out. We don't want anybody contaminating the crime scene. I suggested that they put her in my car, which was unmarked.
Winnipeg Police Sergeant Eric Gruter was one of the first officers on the scene and one of the first to become suspicious.
Right away, thought it was odd that she wasn't crying, but sometimes shock is involved.
And it was a shocking scene. Not just all the evidence of violence, but to the police, a shockingly inept attempt to clean up after what was clearly murder.
Washer and dryer on the north wall of the basement, where we have some blood right in this location.
And inside the washer, a peculiar load of laundry. Gloves, her husband's balaclava, assorted clothing, garbage bags, all in a residue of bloody water.
Nobody that commits a break-in into a house and murders somebody is going to be washing their clothes there.
So if the laundry wasn't done by an intruder, then who? Two people lived here, and one of them was dead. Ted Michkowski was an unlikely victim. A geography professor, he was strong and fit at 72. He had just returned from a strenuous 8-week research trip to Ukraine and his native Poland. His wife would explain much of this to Sergeant Gruter during a 2-hour chat in the police car, after which the sergeant drove her to police headquarters, the public safety building in downtown Winnipeg.
There was a secretary at the front desk, and to my surprise, she says, "Good morning," in a very cheerful voice, and I thought to myself, I can't see this being a good morning for you, so at this point, I started to have grave concerns.
Concerns would evolve to full-blown suspicion. The widow, Ludmila Elena, also a distinguished academic, would undergo 16 hours of pointed questioning before her day would end. From early on, officers would make no secret of their feeling that she was suspect number one. The crime scene probe would quickly turn into a harvest of evidence, all pointing to one obvious conclusion. Ludmila, in a fit of passion, killed her husband. It was the only explanation that made sense to them. By the morning of July 21st, Winnipeg police were confident enough to share their findings with the public.
There was a struggle that took place inside the home, And during the course of that struggle, he was struck, obviously, with a blunt object.
Struck more than a dozen times, then dragged outside in a botched effort to dispose of the body. Ludmila Alina would soon be charged with second-degree murder. There would be 2 jury trials, 2 verdicts, guilty. Her sentence, life with the possibility of parole after 10 years. The legal concept of finality would mean game over. But law and life will always overlap, and in that human space become elastic. For Ludmila, finality became a place to start what would become a long and lonely struggle for redemption. The lawyer in her second jury trial was Richard Wolfson.
I'm saddened that a jury convicted her because, in my view, this wasn't a close call. In my view, the evidence called out for an acquittal. I'm disappointed that an appellate court wouldn't interfere and that the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case. But I thought this was a case that the system had failed Ludmila.
Cold comfort to Ludmila as she shuffled through 5 prisons in 7 years. She would become a model inmate, but she'd never cease protesting that she didn't kill her husband, no matter what the evidence suggested. After 2 guilty verdicts, her case was what would seem to be a slam dunk. On the face of it, she was guilty. As one policeman put it, guilty as sin. But guilt, like sin, can be a matter of interpretation. And Ludmila Alina, long after her conviction, even after she had done her prison time, would find new hope in a place where young folk learn about the ambiguity of life and the elasticity of law in a Toronto law school.
We basically are going to play lawyer today, and I hope you guys have something to offer.
Osgoode Hall, the law school at York University in Toronto, has a Canadian version of a well-known American program called the Innocence Project.
When you work against the government, they litigate by attrition.
It's a last-ditch source of hope for people living under the constraints of a life sentence.
Looks like it's a pretty good group. But the first thing we have to do is try to get the right people on the right files. What I'm thinking is...
Osgoode law professor Alan Young runs the Innocence Project at York.
So we'll start with Ziba.
Yes.
Now here's the thing, you tell me she's a science person.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Human biology.
So she's our DNA lady this year then.
She is.
I hope she's not going to regret this.
Alex has the forensics background. Strong forensics.
Yeah.
That's his thing.
So I just printed off the list of all the tasks we discussed with Alan.
Okay.
It will fall to Alex Melfi and Ziba Haydarian, 2 second-year law students, to do what even seasoned lawyers would have trouble doing: find grounds for a special appeal to the Government of Canada.
So this is all TEDS, eh?
Yeah, I think it's Ted's.
I don't know what atropine is.
This isn't a typical university course. A woman's life is on the line as they dig into what will become an increasingly perplexing real-life story.
Make sure that our students on the same
For
page,
Alan Young as well, the stakes are high.
God forbid they go to
His law students have grappled with Ludmila's file since 2007, but now it's time for hard decisions, time for a breakthrough, or time to give it up.
Alina, this year, finished, done.
Yeah.
We're going to do one more test. We're going to pay for it ourselves. If it's inconclusive, I'm walking.
There will be a personal video record of their progress, tracking the emotional as well as academic highs and lows of the coming school year.
She's probably been through this whole thing in her mind hundreds and thousands of times, maybe hundreds of times a day. Wondering what went wrong, wondering how to fix it, and not having much control over it. So we're her resource. We really need to reach out.
I always said I would never defend criminals. I never wanted to be a defense lawyer because I never wanted to be put in the situation where I was defending someone who I knew was guilty or who I thought was guilty and didn't want to, help them escape punishment. But I realize now that there's no sort of black and white, really. It's more of gray.
Reaching out into the past. They must get to know their subjects. Trial records and media coverage from the time revealed two complex individuals from a wartime generation and a world far removed from their own brief life experience. Ted and Ludmila met in Russia at a geographers conference in 1979. She moved to Canada and married him 10 years later. It was not a conventional romance, but to their friends, it worked for both of them.
I think their friends knew them pretty well. They seemed to say that they had a good relationship. You'll read different in the newspapers saying that they slept in separate beds and took separate vacations and were a bit of an odd, eccentric couple, but I don't think you can really say that until you actually knew them and saw them together.
It was their passion for research that pulled them together. Well, he was quite gallant, I would say, almost old-fashioned. My dear Ludmila, you know.
Muriel Smith, once prominent in Manitoba politics, knew the couple and believed in Ludmila so much she financed her legal bills to the tune of $40,000.
I heard of the murder on the radio. I thought, sounds like Dostoevsky, truth is stranger than fiction. So it didn't square with anything I knew or had sensed.
People will say, Ludmila did her time, she's out. What's the problem? Just get on with life. What is the problem?
Nobody wants to carry the mark of Cain to their grave. It's not right. You got to die in peace. You don't want to die known as a murderer when you weren't a murderer. I would do the same thing.
When we come back, Ludmila, up close and personal. Kingston, Ontario. Ludmila Elena lives here now in what they call pre-parole conditions, one of which restricts her travel. Today she's expecting important visitors from Toronto. Her latest legal team, whose client on paper is a killer.
Hello? This is Ziba and Alex from the Innocence Project.
Okay, I'm coming down.
Okay, thank you.
She's now 72 years old.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Coming.
Two students are, for now, her only hope for getting back her life. She knows as well as they do, it won't be easy.
I was considered suspect number 1 20 minutes after Supervisor Grutter arrived.
It was a very vicious assault based on the bruising. And there's even marks on Ted's fist showing that he also fought back. But no bruises were found on your body.
I could not fight with my Ted.
To believe Ludmila's version of what might have happened on that fatal night requires a lot of generosity. She took some Valium, went to bed early. She had an early morning flight, a business trip to Vancouver. Ted, riding Ludmila's bicycle, had been visiting some Polish friends. He too had taken Valium for jet lag since he'd just returned from Europe. He'd also had some wine, was wobbly. Ludmila and Ted had separate bedrooms, so when she got up at 5 a.m., it took a while to realize he wasn't there. She had ordered an airport cab to arrive at 5:30. When the cab showed up, the driver, Jaswant Mangat, quickly realized that this was no routine pickup.
When I saw the house number and pulled the car into the driveway, I was surprised to see there was a dead body lying in the driveway. I was scared.
It was a gory scene, a lot of blood, a bicycle on top of the deceased, an empty wallet, but also clear evidence that whatever happened here, the struggle started inside the house. Ludmila, through her trials and ever since, would insist that her husband was a victim of a home invasion, a robbery gone wrong. A story that she's sticking to even now, even after imprisonment, even after the exhaustion of all possible appeals.
Part of the Crown's theory was that whoever had murdered your husband had dragged him from the living room where the fight started and dragged him out to the driveway on garbage bags, right? That were stapled together or something like that. How heavy was Ted in comparison to you, like weight-wise? Like, would you have been able to even have pulled Ted?
I just don't understand how it's possible.
Yeah, it would have come apart, right? And they didn't, of course, test to see, yeah, but
of course.
Common sense, they would pull apart.
Before that meeting, Ludmila was, in a way, an abstraction, a textbook case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a
Take care,
pleasure.
Ludmila.
Have a good trip.
Yeah, thank you
Have
very
a
much.
good trip. Bye.
Meeting her would change the human chemistry, introduce the students to the ambiguous complexities of law and life.
I just don't understand how it's possible.
Yeah, it would have come apart, right? And they didn't, of course, test to see, yeah, but
of course.
Common sense, they would pull apart.
Are you fellows at this point her advocates in a contest to prove her innocence? Or are you learning to be skeptical or hard-nosed lawyers?
We're trying to ask and follow every avenue. We want to know.
But what if she's stringing you along? How do you penetrate that?
It's a good question. We're still learning how to do that, I guess.
She is a murderer. She's a convicted murderer. And so what happened to those? Suddenly you're looking at the real person.
Exactly, and then just to see the woman behind all of the trial transcripts we've been reading, and seeing her emotional response and seeing how she suffered through it, she's really become very broken from the whole experience.
You see Grandma sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's tough. You know, it's very tough.
It was difficult to see her as a brutal killer. She weighed about 90 pounds, had no history of violence, was, in the purest sense, a Russian intellectual. And the law students would find in the material some persuasive evidence to support her claim of innocence.
His wallet is lying in the carport.
Maybe it was a robbery gone wrong. His body showed signs that he'd fought back. There were defensive injuries to his hands. He was battered, bruised, and scratched. She seemed relatively unscathed for someone who supposedly had just been through a violent struggle. Her lawyer, Richard Wolfson.
Well, I thought that the forensic evidence was such that it supported Ludmila's position that she hadn't committed this crime. The body had been left on the driveway, and mysteriously on the driveway were 14 footprints in blood, which were not made by Ludmila Alina and not made by her husband. They were, I argued, made by the person that murdered her husband.
A considerable amount of the wrongful convictions that have occurred that are documented in the United States and in Canada relate to faulty forensic science.
Forensic science in Ludmila's case was mostly on the prosecution's side. Like many accused people, she couldn't afford her own experts.
You know the whole problem of, justice for the rich.
Juries usually find the evidence of experts persuasive, even when they don't entirely understand it.
You assume the person talking is correct. You do that in class when you listen to me. And you don't know what the hell I'm saying, but you believe I know what I'm talking about, right? And you think the problem is your lack of understanding, where sometimes I'm just full of shit.
The forensic evidence in Ludmila's case mostly had to do with all the blood, and the prosecution experts were persuasive. The bloody smears and spatters all pointed to her guilt. Now, years later, the law student Ziba Hidarian travels to Ottawa to get a new perspective.
When you're presented with such a scene, what would initially come to mind based on the blood splatter?
Blood spatter expert Pat Laturnis.
When we look at the carport area where the car is, something that's interesting here is that from this perspective, it's difficult to tell whether the car is over top of the bloodstains or not. Which could be significant. If the bloodstains were there first, then the car was moved on top of them. These bloodstains are passive, which means they went straight down, which means that some blood source was above it, and then it's possible that this vehicle was moved subsequent to that.
Ludmila was shooken up after everything, and she doesn't recall, but she told me that she might have tried to get Ted into the car to take him to the hospital. She thought he might still be alive. So I'm just trying to understand the possibilities, but she might have moved it.
Well, that could explain it, why the car was moved then.
Do you think that's odd that she would try to take him in the trunk as opposed to like in the back of the car?
Definitely, because, you know, if she loves him and she still has hope, she's taking him to the hospital with the hope that there's a way of resuscitating him or getting him back. So it's weird that you just throw him in the trunk like that.
Yeah. And I think if people were to hear that, they'd be like, motive to hide the body
Right.
kind of deal, right? So.
Former Winnipeg policeman Eric Gruter. She's a tiny little woman. I mean, how do you imagine somebody her size delivering a fatal blow to a man?
Well, adrenaline is something that comes into play when people either get afraid or they're severely angry, and lends a lot of strength. I've seen people who have been really small that, you know, half my size that I had difficulty controlling because of fear, anger, and adrenaline. This is possibly where he got hit with the object on the head. So,
and he can.
So what do? Stagger out and then fall, and the bicycle's on top of you now? Obviously, he was dragged out of the house, and obviously the bicycle was placed on top of him.
The bike, one of the most perplexing aspects of the crime. Before the night of the murder, it had been unused, stored in the basement, tires flat. He'd used his wife's bike to visit his friends that night. Who would or could have taken that old bike outside, and why? Maybe he did put it there himself. Maybe she did. Maybe someone else. An infinity of maybes. But after 2 convictions in jury trials, maybes aren't going to get them very far. If they hope to file an application for a political review of the guilty verdicts, what they call a 696 application for the criminal code section that makes this long shot possible, they're going to need new evidence, solid, non-speculative fact, the kind of certainty that comes from science. They are well into winter and learning that science, like the law, moves at a pace they can't control. They need science to support the theory that the murder was a robbery gone wrong.
They're definitely not going to do a
Alan Young is blunt.
analysis. If we don't have DNA to do a cold hit for another suspect, we got to have a theory, you know. Mind you, random intrusions and home invasions and killings happen all the time. But to move the government to vacate a conviction, they'd want to know something's, you know, going on.
Okay, so I'll take look at the fingerprints.
Now they'll have to pressure the Winnipeg police.
So we need to keep track of what happened to the fingernails, obviously.
They've been slow producing the exhibits the students need to send out for analysis in Texas.
We need some new pressing evidence to move the case, really give it that jump it needs. Right now we're just building, and then hopefully once we get to that edge, the top of that, I don't know, I'm using all these analogies now. I think it's because I'm hyper tired.
Ludmila's case is just one of 4 courses in second-year law, but it's real life playing out in real time.
Elena's a sad case for me because, 1, I made the instinctive call, she's innocent. 2, I see problems in the evidence that was presented. But the only avenue that really seems open at this moment is the biological retesting. And it's frustrating as hell because there was so much blood on this crime scene. You've seen the pictures. I mean, it really was a bloody killing. And we just can't get a conclusive hit.
I don't really know what's going to be happening with the case. I mean, things take time, so it's not like TV. You know, I think that's one problem people think is, you know, cases and murders are solved within half an hour. No, it takes a long, long time.
When we come back, now it looks awfully suspicious, as if somebody gathered up the mess and tried to clean it.
I know.
Ludmila Elena finds some comfort in the Orthodox religion of her Russian homeland. Perhaps the promise of a miracle that will reverse 16 years of pure misfortune that started with the brutal murder of her husband.
Please help me. I lost him. I lost home. I lost freedom. I lost my ability to do my scientific work. What else?
In the judgment of 2 juries and the courts, she brought it on herself. Beat her husband senseless with a weapon that has never been recovered. Dragged him outside in a futile effort to dispose of his body. In a panic, tried to clean up a bloody mess, and then concoct a story about a robbery gone wrong. Not so, says her lawyer, Richard Wolson.
Often in a murder case, you would say to somebody, tell me what really happened. Maybe you got into a fight. Maybe there's some provocation. Maybe we could go to the Crown and ask for a reduction in charge to a manslaughter. She would have none of it because she has said from the day that I met her that she did not kill her husband.
There's something pretty interesting.
Her last hope for redemption rests with 2 law students who were little more than toddlers at the time.
Wow, a letter to Stephen Harper. I'm innocent. I did not kill my husband.
It's now January, and the school year is slipping by. They're anxiously awaiting lab results on blood samples they've sent to Texas for analysis.
I just don't want her to be disappointed.
With their professor, they're wondering, how far can they afford to go?
The real million-dollar question is if none of this bears any fruit. You get all these exhibits, it's like inconclusive. Do we go for the other 25?
Yeah. Is this about proving her innocent? Or is this about teaching law students how to prove her and a whole bunch of other people in their careers not guilty?
My goal is to free innocent people. That's what justice is all about. I'd be proud to be part of that process. The focus of the program, or the immediate objective of the program, is to train students in how to look for flaws in the criminal justice system.
And if you help some poor, wrongfully convicted person along the way, bonus.
Exactly, icing on the cake.
Interesting.
They've already learned that in real life as lawyers, their job will be to scrutinize the justice system.
There's a lot to sift through, and there's a lot of discrepancy.
When the vast resources of the state are mobilized to judge an individual accused of crime, it's up to them to make sure the process will be competent and fair. And they're learning that sometimes, even after their best efforts, they will have to break bad news to someone they have come to know and maybe care about.
I wouldn't want to tell her face to face. I don't know how I would.
But I think we owe it to her to tell her face to face. I mean, that's just, we have to sit down and have a conversation with her. I mean, that's just, you know, part of the job. But I guess I would cross that road when I came to it. I hope we don't get to that, because I think that would be one of the hardest things to do, to tell somebody, you know what, in the eyes of the law, you're guilty and you're staying that way. Like, that's, even though you fully believe you're innocent and we think, or we possibly think that you are too, I think that would be a tough thing to do.
So far in the case they're working on, it hasn't come to that. They still have time and hope that advanced DNA testing of blood samples taken from the crime scene will generate good news. Eric Gruter, the former Winnipeg policeman, is skeptical.
I think it's good that we have people that question things. If we didn't ever question things, then there would be some cases where people would be wrongfully convicted, and it's important that we root this out. In my opinion, this is not the case here.
So the reason we're talking is because a whole lot of people think that you killed your husband. What do you say to those people?
I did not kill my husband. I never been involved in anything that even close to crime, any kind of crime. I loved my husband, and I still love him.
We know for a fact that Ted died violently. Who killed him?
I don't know. I think that it was a robbery. Went wrong.
If it was a robber, you have to ask, why would he make such a mess? Why would he drag poor Ted outside? How would the bicycle get involved?
First, I would put under question that he was drugged from inside, at least from inside.
How did he get out then?
I think that he walked out.
He walked out?
Yeah. Pursuing the
he chased
people who robbed him. That's what I think.
Her husband's empty wallet was near his body. She insists that more than $1,000, along with jewelry, went missing from the house. But then, there's that incriminating laundry. The washing machine is full of strange things. Balaclava in the middle of the summer, gloves in the middle of the summer, clothes and garbage bags. And there are blood traces in the remaining water. Now, it looks awfully suspicious, as if somebody gathered up the mess and tried to clean it.
Yeah. I know.
And that somebody would have to have been you.
I know that it looks suspicious, but I know my husband, he could put in the wash everything together.
Garbage bags?
Yeah.
Why garbage bags?
He thought that he is doing recycling. A second hand and third time using same garbage bags, and that garbage bags covered the bicycle. Probably they were dirty.
But what about the blood?
What I think that when he returned home, he probably fell from his bike. He got this bleeding nose, and he wanted to wash what he wore, because everything he wore was found inside the washing machine.
She's suggesting that, having fallen off her bike, which he'd been using, he put his bloody clothing in the wash, then dragged his own old bike up from the basement to be used next day.
As we're looking at the bike, you can see stains on the fenders.
Blood spatter expert Pat Laternas.
See these stains here?
Right.
That means that something was above that. If you were to tell me that a person was bleeding and standing above the bike or riding that bike, that would make sense.
If I wanted to cover up, I would do it without exposing the body on street, and then call 911. As a scientific researcher, I can tell you, if I wanted him to harm him, I could do it much not perfect, but humane.
If you wanted to get rid of your husband, you could have done it cleanly and efficiently, and you could have got away with it.
Humane. He would just fall asleep, and that's it.
Finally, the law students get good news. What seems to be a breakthrough from that lab in Texas.
I'm gonna pass something around. It's a DNA report. Look at the second last line of the first paragraph, which I will read. The good news is the YSTR test, which only looks at male DNA, it looks like it comes from at least 2 males. You have an unknown male in that blood pooled together. You've got a killer.
Ziba Haydarian can't wait to share the news.
Hi, Alina. How are you?
One of the exhibits, the results were very promising.
Indicating that there's another suspect involved?
Perhaps it's the big break that they need to file that crucial application for a new look at Ludmila's case in Ottawa.
Keep fighting, keep hoping for the best, because that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Right now, I don't think that Ludmila could have done it. I mean, it takes a certain form of person to kill somebody, and the way they described the murder was that it was brutal and very violent. I mean, blood everywhere, and his head was bashed in, and I don't think she could have done that.
We've progressed, but even if we are able to take the application through and it succeeds, the question remains, what did happen?
Okay, guys.
When we come back, another U-turn on the road to innocence.
Is she changing it to it may be? Because I thought it was like, you know, slam dunk. There's a third party
now
in there.
I think it's it may be.
Convicted of a murder she denies, serving a life sentence even though she's on parole, Ludmila Elena can only dream of home or read about it. Russia, where she was born and educated, might as well be on another planet. This is the life of a lifer, imprisonment by rules and regulations.
When you release on parole, they can include in special conditions, for example, tools that you cannot have in your possession, or some connections you cannot connect with particular people.
Who are you not allowed to connect?
All male.
No men.
Yeah. All my meeting with male, both platonic and romantic, I have to report. And I don't
She even needed special clearance for this interview. For two legal novices, her case reveals the human face of law and all the human failures that can derail justice in a trial.
You sort of overstated a lot of stuff, I think, at the trial, you know.
There's absolutely no blood on the couch, for example.
But they're also learning about disappointment.
No, I remember the whole thing with
The lab technician who had raised their hopes with talk of a mystery third person at the murder scene now brings them back to earth.
Is she changing it to it may be? Because I thought it was like, you know, slam dunk. There's a third party
Now
in there.
I think it's it may be, but we can't say a definitive mixture, nothing like that. And it seemed like she really took away from what she was saying in the first instance. It's not good, because that means that now we can't even include another person, or the possibility there was another person there, which sucks.
They don't have much to work with, though, do they? They talk about a hair here and a little spot of blood there, and they have high hopes. Do you have high hopes? Do you? Or are you scientifically resigned?
Scientifically, I don't have, but emotionally, I have hope. You cannot live without hope.
They've come too far to turn back now. And for Alan Young, who has had Ludmila's case for more than 3 years, there's enough instinctive certainty about her innocence to merit yet another round of lab analysis.
It seems like 21 is the relevant one, blood sample on outer car door handle. So it seems like that's the one we want. We don't actually want the key, we want the blood sample.
Okay.
We have other things to test. I will authorize those tests. I will pay for those tests. But as soon as they can extract from that pooled blood a profile, even a scanned profile of a third-party unidentified male, I'm ready to go to Ottawa. This is the hub of the activity. You know these characters.
Good to see you again.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, thanks for coming all the way here.
Thank you.
Today she has a special pass for a visit to Toronto, another meeting with the students who have taken on her case. perhaps the last time they will meet.
In regards to the DNA testing, we're hoping to get some results back in about 2 to 3 weeks. So what we are testing are the keys that were in the car door. There's the blood on the steps again, which we're going to retest again to see if we can get a better mixed profile, because I think they said it was a low quant, so we want to get a higher count on that.
And because we are so hopeful that the results will show something positive in your light, that we are putting together all the components right now.
And then, yeah, if we get a positive outcome, the affidavit's going to go in, you're going to sign that, and then we'll put the 696 together, hopefully pretty quickly.
How long?
It can take over a year. I think we have
Over a year. Oh.
quite long.
Ludmila's case, for all their good intentions, has been another project, part of an education that in the long run may well have incalculable benefits, but not just yet, and not for her. For the law students, it will soon be time for them to move on to other teachers, other studies.
It was hard to say bye to her because I don't know if I'll be seeing her again. I hope I do. I'll definitely be staying in touch with her. I mean, hopefully one day the application result comes in, she is found innocent, and we can reconnect.
These young kids learning to be lawyers have embraced your case. What's your reaction?
I'm grateful to them. In my view, they are heroes because they protect who is in trouble, who is wrongly abused by the system.
Alex Melfi and Ziba Haydarian intend to carry on their legal studies, but in another branch of law. The criminal justice system is just too fraught with human tragedies.
It's too personal. You know, you're dealing with victims and you're dealing with real people and affecting real people's lives in that way, in a more personal level. So I just don't think I want to have that sort of baggage attached to myself, and I don't want to have that stuff weighing on my conscience.
Their work may yet yield benefits. Those lab tests conceivably could turn up evidence they need to argue that it really was some unknown individual who killed Ludmila's husband. But even with this evidence in hand, they're up against a reality that if they haven't learned it yet in school, they'll learn it soon enough in legal practice. The justice system struggles to avoid mistakes, but is also famously reluctant to admit to ever having made one. For now, and maybe the remainder of her days, the system says she's guilty and must live for as much time as she has left in the limbo of parole. Her closest living relative, an ailing sister, lives in Russia. Her husband's grave is in his native Poland, two places she may never see again. A final note. Reversal of a wrongful conviction is a relatively rare event in Canadian justice, and when it has happened, it has typically taken between 9 and 12 years of dedicated and costly legal effort. Stay with us. The Fifth Estate will be right back. Welcome back to the Fifth Estate. For every story we do on the program, you can find out lots more about it on our website. Just go to cbc.ca/fifth. That's our program for this week. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. For everyone here at the Fifth Estate, thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.